that, and what a fun time to get to talk to students and public members about the careers in the law. Not only am I moderator, I could actually be on this panel. I also started my career in the public sector. My first legal job was as an assistant attorney general of Texas. And I would tell you that although it was a very, very long time ago, though that aspect of adding heft and legitimacy to my professional resume, it's just as valuable on it. I'm just proud of it today as I was when I first received that job, got the opportunity to serve the state of Texas that many years ago. So I really enjoy the opportunity to talk about public sector and public lawyers. Our panelists tonight, I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving a long introduction to them because I'm going to ask them to tell you about their careers as part of this. But I want to welcome the Honorable Dan Dow, who's the District Attorney of San Luis Obispo County, Teresa Goldner, who in full disclosure is chair of the Board of Trustees of Monterey College of Law. But Teri Goldner served both as a United States Magistrate as well as Kern County Counsel, and Lupita Fernandez, who balances our district attorney's representation as a public defender here. And so you really, at the end, have an amazing opportunity to talk to someone who's been on the federal side. I've served the state. We have two who serve the county. So it gives you I think a really nice blend of seeing what type of career opportunities there are. So with that brief introduction, let me start first with you, Dan. Dan, you're the district attorney. I know we just presume everyone knows what a district attorney does, but probably we only know what we see on television. So tell us a little about the nature of that career position.
Sure will. Thank you, Dean, for having this event tonight. So the position of district attorney is we are the public prosecutor. In California, the Constitution created the district attorneys and sheriffs to be constitutional officers of the state so that each county in California has one that's elected by the people to maintain that we are representing the people in our community and held accountable by the voters in our community. So we handle all of the criminal prosecutions for state law violations that happen within our jurisdiction. And we also can handle civil cases. For instance, in my office, we have a consumer and environmental protection division where that attorney and staff works on consumer protection issues, environmental protection, even civilly filing lawsuits against companies. What's most common in the civil area for us is unfair business practices. Perhaps a company is trying to cut corners and not abide by the law and regulations that other competitors would be doing. And so thereby they're saving some cost and expense to them to get an advantage unfairly over their competitors that are abiding by the law. So we've had those kinds of cases on the civil end. But really, to me, what I love so much about being a prosecutor is that our ultimate goal and our charge is to represent the people in seeking the truth in all of our criminal actions. Where our charge is not to win a case, but it is to seek the truth. And so our ethical and legal obligation is that if we, from the beginning, somewhere before the end, if we become aware of information that leads us to believe that we do not have enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of the accused, we have an obligation to dismiss that case and not to go forward. So for me, it's not about winning. It's never about trying to win a case, but to have the truth come out. If the truth is that someone is innocent, we want that to be the outcome. If the truth is that they're guilty, then we want that to be the outcome, and then have a just result. And so that's, to me, just a snapshot of what the role of the district attorney is in a particular community.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. So Lupita, you're the other side of the coin. You provide services to citizens in our county as the public defender. Tell us a little about the role you play.
Yes, so basically my role is to represent my clients. So a lot of these clients, they come from very distinct backgrounds. My role is basically to analyze the cases, discuss the cases with them, provide them with options, whether that be, the district attorney's offer, whether we want to take it to trial, or provide them with alternative solutions such as mental health diversion. Our county does have a lot of diversion programs, which is very helpful for many clients, especially those that do not want to pursue trial. So I love my job. I get to meet different individuals every single week. Every single week I have a different challenge. And it's just one of those jobs that is very rewarding at the end of the day, because the main goal is to bring a just outcome for my clients, whether that be through trial or, maybe negotiating the offer. That's what my role is as a public defender.
Thank you, Lupita. Teri, you bring two different viewpoints to the panel tonight. One is, although you were not a Superior Court judge where the district attorney and public defenders would be presenting, but you were a federal magistrate who sat in a judicial office. Tell us a little about that first, the role of being a judicial officer.
Sure, of course. Actually, I was a judicial officer in state court and in federal court. When I was in state court, I was a Superior Court commissioner. And so when I was a commissioner, that's when the judges appoint you to be a judge instead to hear cases instead of being elected or being appointed by the governor. So commissioners always used to have this joke that they would say, what's the difference between a commissioner and a judge? And the answer was, this was a commissioner joke, was the judges know the governor, the commissioners know the law. Just a commissioner joke. But anyway, when I was a commissioner, I did a lot of trials, a lot of criminal trials, civil trials, all that kind of stuff. But then before I became county counsel, I was a United States magistrate judge. And that's in federal court. And that's one of two trial court judges in the federal court system. One is what's called an Article 3 judge of the Constitution. Those include district judges. That kind of the way the federal judiciary goes is you have the magistrate judge, then you have a district judge, then you have an appeals court judge, and then you have the Supreme Court justices. So I always used to say, I'm only 3 steps up from being on the Supreme Court. But sometimes I used to refer to that as being a baby federal court judge because you're on the bottom rung of the judgeship. But what you do as a magistrate judge is you hear trials, just like district judges do. The only difference really is that to hear a felony case or to conduct a dispositive motion or hearing or trial in federal court, if you're a magistrate judge, the parties have to stipulate to you. That means they have to consent to you hearing the case like you were a district court judge. And I used to get a lot of that. So I've done both criminal trials and civil trials in federal court. But by statute, magistrate judges aren't allowed to try felony cases. So while I tried felony cases in Superior Court as a commissioner, I did not try felony cases in federal court as a magistrate judge because the law doesn't let you do that. But as a federal magistrate judge, it is a lot of working at the desk time. You are continually researching and writing and issuing opinions. In federal court, a lot of cases are submitted on the pleadings. A lot of motions are submitted on the pleadings. There's not as much in-court time as there is in Superior Court unless you're a district judge. And then you're always in court hearing trials all the time. But most of what I did was primarily civil. I did a lot of what is called federal habeas work. That's habeas corpus petitions by petitioners who are incarcerated and they're trying to get out of prison. And they're alleging that there's a constitutional defect in their trial process somewhere. And because the Eastern District of California, where I sat, has more prisons in it than any district in the state, and I think in the country, don't quote me on that, but I think that's the case. We had tons and tons of habeas cases and prisoner civil rights cases. And that's what the magistrate judges did primarily in my district. So what you do in those kinds of cases is you have to look at the entire trial court record transcripts, everything, all the motions, everything that was done. And you kind of go through it with this constitutional comb to find out if there's any significant constitutional problems that would justify undoing that conviction or that sentence. And that's what I spent a lot of time doing, were those kinds of cases, as well as what's called prisoner civil rights cases. That's where the prisoners are objecting to the conditions of their confinement for the most part, that it rises to the level of a constitutional violation. So much of what I did in federal court was constitutional law type issues. And then I also heard, the civil cases from time to time, but, kind of the regular kind of civil cases that arise under federal statutes or under the federal constitution. But primarily, that's the kind of work that I did as a magistrate judge. And I also got to do what I referred to as front end work, which is where you get to, it's actually very fun when all the federal agents come in, the law enforcement agents, they come in and they want to have a complaint issued. It has to be issued by the magistrate judge. So they will bring in a complaint to your chambers and you will look at it and you will decide if the appropriate legal grounds exist to issue that complaint. And then you will sign it, and then it gets served, and then it goes out and it'll be filed, and then the criminal proceeding will begin. And then I also did a lot of search warrants, where you have a search warrant application and you have to review all that and decide if probable cause exists to think that a crime has been committed and that there's evidence of the crime at the location where they want to search. And lots of that kind of work too. And that was a 24/7 job, because where I sat, I was the only federal court judge in my area. I sit in Bakersfield, and I was the only federal court judge here. So did a lot of that work too. And that was a 24/7 job too. So I was always having exciting, DEA agents and FBI agents come to my house with search warrant applications and things like that. So it was very fun. The whole job was fun, but I did that for about 6 years, 5.5, 6 years. And then I became the county counsel. And if you want me to tell you about that, I can talk about that on a further.
Let's come back to that one. Okay. Lupita, you're early in your career. We've got a number of law students on the listening in. So tell us, did you think this type of a job, or at what point did you think this might be the direction you wanted to go in your career?
I think I started pretty early, thinking that this was going to be my career, probably in the first year of law school. After I took the bar, things changed a little bit. I was a little undecided, but eventually, things just fell into place, and I was employed by the Public Defender's Office. And I think I took the right decision. I mean, I cannot envision myself practicing any other type of law. It's a job that really makes you apply the skills that you learn in law school into real life practice. You are immediately put into situations where the client just wants a trial, and you have to, prepare for trial, and you have to be ready and know all your evidence codes and proceed accordingly. So it's really a job that keeps you on your feet, takes a lot of hours of work. And it just, keeps you busy and keeps you wanting to learn more on a daily basis so that you could become better and better.
That's an interesting point you make, Lupita, because what we know, if you look across the entire range of legal careers, the vast majority of lawyers, 70, 80%, never step foot in a courtroom. They're transactional lawyers. But every one of you that are on the panel, immediately, litigation in the courtroom and civil procedure and criminal procedure are your daily, what you do every single day. Dan, what about you? Tell us a little about your path into the district attorney's office.
Sure. Well, I did things a little bit different than some. Right after high school, I did 1 year of college and then went into the Army. And I was just an enlisted soldier. College was going to be expensive, and my parents didn't have money to help fund my college. So I did that. And so later on, when I got out of the Army, I came to California and was working and putting myself through my undergraduate program. And I had, starting in 5th grade, for whatever reason, I had decided I'd wanted to become a lawyer when I was really young, and I had kind of let that dream go. But when I finished getting my undergraduate degree at Cal State Hayward in political science with a pre-law option, I kept getting kind of called back to what I had wanted to do was become a lawyer. And so I joined the Army National Guard after a 4-year break. I got back in 2001 before 9/11, and I started at Santa Clara University with the idea that I would become a prosecutor, but I had never really been exposed to it. It was just an idea that I felt like I would have an affinity for being on the prosecution side. So while in law school, I was exposed to both defense and prosecutors that came into Santa Clara and talked about it. And I just really fell in love with criminal law and felt like this was an area where every single day you get to deal with important constitutional issues, helping victims, also helping to make sure that the community is as safe as possible by holding people accountable for when they violate our society's laws. And so I was fortunate enough to do an internship here in the San Luis Obispo County DA's office after my second year in law school. And I got to do a jury trial, which is rare for a law student to be able to do, but I did over that summer. It was a DUI case that took 7 days at trial against a private lawyer that litigated every issue you could imagine. And it was an incredibly rewarding experience. And because I was a little older than the average law student at the time, about 10 years older, I had some life experience that I was able to bring beyond just going from high school to college and law school. And my mentor here at the time was two of them, Sandy Mitchel and Kirk Wilson, and they kind of guided me and gave me some direction, but enabled me to try that case completely as a certified law student without another lawyer doing anything other than sitting in there and supervising me. And I knew after completing that trial that this is what I wanted to make a career of. And so when I graduated from law school and passed the bar, I applied in every DA's office that I could around the state that was hiring. Got 2 offers, one from Riverside and one from Kern County, and visited both offices. Decided to go to Riverside, worked out in the desert, and immediately got put on a felony preliminary hearing team, where I was trying, putting on preliminary hearings on felony cases, evidentiary hearings for lots of very serious cases, and did 100 preliminary hearings off after a very short time. And you get very comfortable with putting witnesses on in court. And I loved what I did. I loved getting to meet the officers and the victims and the witnesses, expert witnesses, and putting evidence on. And so shortly after that stint on the prelim team, I went to misdemeanor trials and then domestic violence team when I heard that San Luis Obispo County was hiring. And so I'd been in Riverside for 2 years and was fortunate enough to be able to come in here to San Luis Obispo as a deputy DA, a lateral transfer. But the job is just really rewarding. As I said at the beginning, the goal is to seek the truth. And for me, when I compare what we do as a prosecutor or in the criminal law as opposed to civil law, civil attorneys are often fighting over money and over contract issues to get the very best possible outcome for their client. But as a prosecutor, we're truly seeking the truth and what's best for the entire community, even, philosophically for the accused, because, we represent even the accused when we're representing the people of the state of California. So I love what I do. Now, on the military side, I'll throw this out there as well, Mitch. I've been in 2006, was commissioned because I was in the Guard as a judge advocate. So I've also done military law. I was deployed to Iraq for a year as a prosecutor and tried court martials in Iraq. And as of August of 2020, I was assigned to be the one military judge for the state of California. So for any court martials that come to California, either in the Air Guard or the Army Guard, I'm the judge that will sit and hear those courts martial.
And Dan, just to go on that for just a second, there are both civilian as well as military officers in the Judge Advocate General Corps, isn't there? They have both, civilian lawyers as well as military lawyers that play a role.
There are certainly civilian lawyers that are They wouldn't be called judge advocates because that's a military term for the military service member, but they do hire civilian attorneys to work for the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, to provide additional assistance to the military departments. However, they are not able to go into a court martial and do any practice. So the practicing in a court martial is the military lawyer, with the exception of defense counsel. A military accused has the right to hire counsel of their choosing, including civilian counsel that could be detailed to represent them outside of our trial defense system that we have. But one of the great things about the military law program is that you get experience doing lots of things. So I was a legal assistance attorney for a little while, where I was able to write wills and powers of attorney and child care agreements and write letters to landlords telling them they couldn't evict the soldier when the family when the soldier was deployed, things that are quite rewarding. In addition, there's contract law, fiscal law. When I was in Iraq, I did some international law, the humanitarian law, advising the commander on the law of war, making sure that they weren't doing operations that violated the Geneva Convention and the various international law principles that are out there. And you can also be a defense counsel. So you can get assigned as defense, as prosecution. You can do a stint as a magistrate and do administrative law hearings and review search warrants. So to anyone who's considering, or maybe never has considered before, the military as a place to practice law, it is an area where you can try just a little bit of everything. And then when you get out, you can take your experience into the private sector.
That's great. So, Teri, go ahead.
Can I add to that? I had a wonderful experience as a magistrate judge for those years, because in magistrate judge court, I would travel to the bases, to the military bases, and hear the cases that were charged against the civilians, but they were tried in the same courtroom where the military crimes were tried. But the JAG officers actually would take off their military uniforms and put on their civilian suits, and they would come in and they would be the special assistant United States attorneys and prosecute those criminal cases against the civilians who were charged with crimes committed on the base, on the different bases. So I had a really great experience with these lawyers who were I would say in their real life, they were JAG officers doing all the other stuff. But then when the magistrate judge would come to town, they would put on their civil suit and be prosecutors of the civilians. And so it was very interesting, and they did a really good job. And I concur with what District Attorney Dow says about how broad the practice is that the JAG officers get to have. I got to know a lot of them, and boy, exciting careers. They get to do all kinds of things. It's definitely worth checking out.
So Teri, while you're thinking about it, so you gave us a couple examples of things you did that were this broad range of activities. Actually, each of you have said that there's this broad range of responsibilities. Give us an example of something that surprised you, looking back retrospectively while you were a public attorney, something that you didn't think, you wouldn't have expected going into the career, but now looking back was a surprise.
Well, the last, I'm actually a senior counsel right now for a law firm in Bakersfield, so I can't say that's my last job, but my last government job was as the Kern County Counsel. And the county council is kind of the civil, pardon me if I say this, District Attorney Dow, but they're kind of like the civil cousin to the district attorney's office. The county council is the county's law firm, and we represent the county and all of the county boards, departments, agencies, commissions, all that kind of stuff, in not only defending the county and providing transactional advice to the county and all those different entities, but also bringing civil cases on behalf of the county for things. And that's where you can really shine in your service to your community. That's what I found. And some of the most rewarding cases that I remember being a part of were things, for example, environmental cases, where we had the city of Los Angeles bringing in sludge, which is treated waste, and spreading it on thousands of acres of farm fields in Kern County. Well, we sued the city of Los Angeles, and they sued us back. And we had this big 10-year battle between us, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I have to tell you that that was such a worthwhile endeavor, because it really felt like we were on the side of the angels, because we were protecting the health and safety of the people in the community. And that is really meaningful to me. And that's the reason why I wanted to be the county counsel, because I wanted to be able to take everything that I had learned in my career. By that time, I'd been a lawyer and a judge for quite a long time, and kind of hone it to make my community a better place. And I felt like the county counsel's office gave me a chance to do that, not only because of the way we could defend the county, but because of lawsuits that we could bring on behalf of the county to effect change. And that was very exciting to me. On the other hand, a lot of representing the county council means that you have to represent people, employees that get sued for doing bad things. For example, civil rights violations. And there were a lot of cases where, let's say, the sheriff's deputies were sued for engaging in excessive force and things like that. So there's a lot of ugly cases that you have to deal with too. But it's good to know that when you're doing that, you are defending them with integrity, but you also know that when it's time to settle that case, you need to do that and use your judgment. And so those are all, it's just so, it's such an interesting field to be a government attorney in an office or a type of office like District Attorney Dow was talking about, where you can do all different kinds of things. That's just, to me, every morning going down the road, getting ready to go to, work, I've got my hands on the wheel and I'm driving down the road and I'm wondering, what is today going to bring, in a good way, because it's such an exciting thing to not know that today is going to be exactly like the day before, exactly like the day before, exactly like the day before. It's just such a broad ranging law job, and it really challenges you in all different kinds of ways. And that's the fun of it for me.
Thank you. So, Lupita, you said that you thought about going into the public defender's office your first year of law school. So that was an idea you had in your mind. You had some vision of what it was going to be like. Well, now you are there. So what, if anything, has surprised you about the nature of the job?
I'm going to say the caseload. So I heard a lot about the caseload, but never imagined it was this great. I remember my first week there, I was just amazed at the number of pretrial conferences that a public defender could have in one day. It's definitely something that surprised me. I honestly hadn't been in court at all. So me stepping into that courtroom and looking at all these individuals who needed assistance really, really surprised me. I never thought that the caseload was that big. It's definitely something that I think everyone should consider, because it's not an easy task. You need to consider a significant amount of time into each of these cases, and you have to keep that in mind that some weeks the caseload might be a little less, but for the most part you're going to be looking at approximately 17 pretrial conferences in one single day. So that's something that I think everyone should keep in mind, that it's very challenging, and it takes time. Not all cases can be resolved in one day. You need to review the discovery with the clients. You need to sometimes conduct investigations, and everyone seeks your attention, because all of these cases matter. They matter especially to the individual that is in court. So you always be attentive, listen, and try your best to remain focused.
So Dan, you have both you have your own caseload of cases, but you're an administrator as well, and you are in the business of hiring young lawyers into the district attorney's office. So you've got a lot of prospects out here on this session tonight. What would you tell them that you're looking for? If someone's thinking like Lupita, first year, second year law school, I think I want to be in the district attorney's office. What would you advise them? What are you looking for?
Great, good question. And yes, we're continually recruiting. In fact, if you have an interest, or if you know other people that are already practicing law that have an interest, have them send us a letter of interest with a resume. And what I'm really looking for fundamentally is somebody with a real strong ethical core that likes our mission of seeking the truth and knows that they want to do something where you're never hiding the ball. I mean, as a prosecutor, we have an obligation to share all of the information we have in our case with the defense, including the stuff that hurts our case, quote unquote. It's not at all like a game, but if you would a minute envision playing cards, you can't show your cards to your opponent if you want to win and bluff, right? Well, the prosecutor, because we represent the sovereign, we are to never ever hide the ball or try to play some kind of game to get an advantage, because we're about truth and justice. So I want to hire someone who really identifies with that and has a strong ethical core and a commitment to what our mission is. That's the most important thing. And then second to that would be passion, for helping people in the community, passion for being in court and doing what it is required, putting on evidence and eliciting the evidence that's going to support the elements in a case, and wants to do it. We've hired people before that were a little more soft-spoken than some others, and once they do it and they learn it, they tend to be very comfortable doing it. And one of the things I love about being a prosecutor is that, and I think it would be for any legal profession really, as long as you're performing consistent with who you are and your personality and your kind of your core of who you are as a person, you can be effective. I've seen prosecutors that are soft-spoken, and I've seen some that are extremely, loud, and on the defense side as well. And either side can, or personality can be effective. So I don't really look at personality other than I want someone that's driven, driven to accomplish and driven to go and put in the effort that they need to do. Lupita mentioned the caseload, and I know it's incredibly high with our colleagues on the defense side. We also carry significant caseloads, so someone that's not going to be afraid of jumping in and rolling up their sleeves and working really hard. But to me, those are the top things. And lastly, I guess my staff, my fellow managers in the office would say, recruiting somebody that would fit in personality-wise, somebody that you would enjoy spending so much time together, because as colleagues, you end up spending a lot of time together in the office, and you want someone that's a team player.
Thank you. So Teri, we didn't talk as much about your private practice, but you actually bring to this panel significant experience, both in private practice as well as public practice. If somebody is in law school or early in their career trying to balance between the two, what guidance might you give them as to what might tip the scales one way or the other as a career choice?
Boy, that's a tough one, Dean Winick. I can tell you that when I started, that was back in 1982. It's a long time. I had no idea that I would end up doing what I did in my career. I didn't have the foggiest clue. I started out just, getting in that rat race. I went to work for a big law firm up in San Francisco, worked, zillion hours and all of that stuff until I burned myself out. And that's when I started to think about, well, what is it that I really like to do? And I realized that I started out as a transactional lawyer. And that means, writing contracts and negotiating things and all of that. And that was really fun. And that's a good way to get your brain, keep your brain in shape and all that stuff. But if you feel like you start something and you feel like something is missing because it's not quite firing on all cylinders for you as far as your passion goes, don't be afraid to change. It's okay to change courses, to go from being a transactional lawyer to a litigator or whatever, or even backwards. It's okay, because there's so many different law jobs out there that you will find what your passion is. And it took me a while until I realized that what I got bit by was the litigation bug. And once I, had that taste of going into court, which I got by, believe it or not, when I was working for the big law firm in San Francisco, it was because I did an internship, a pro bono internship at a clinic in downtown San Francisco. And once I walked into that courtroom on an unlawful detainer case representing somebody, it was like, I don't know what it was. It was just like something took over me, and I just loved being in court. And so my career kind of moved towards that. And I realized that the more I did that, the more I liked that. But yet now my career is more towards more of the transactional stuff, which is great. I love doing it. It's fun, and I'm having just as much fun now as I did when I was doing the litigation practice, being able to go back and forth. So I think what tipped it for me was kind of that search of what is your passion in a way. And what I mean by passion is, what is that thing that really makes you excited about going to work in the morning? What kind of cases am I going to work on? What kind of people am I going to represent? What kind of goal do I want to accomplish? At the end of my career, what do I want to make sure that I use my brain power for? That type of thing. And when I started thinking about things like that, that's how I made my decisions. I know everybody else is the same, but I would say, don't forget who you are. Don't forget what it is that excites you in the law, because the law is such a wonderful place to be a part of. There's so much to offer in this profession, and there is a perfect position for everybody if you search for it. Just don't give up.
That's great. So Lupita, some of your classmates are just recently out of law school. What guidance would you give them? Let's assume there's an opening in your office, which there is, similar to Dan. I'm sure that you have the opportunity to guide people in as candidates. What would you look for? What would you tell them as far as how to balance? Are you cut out to be a public defender?
Well, I think that if they're really passionate to helping people, especially the voiceless, as I would call them, this is their ideal position. It's not about who's guilty or who's not guilty. It's about ensuring that they get, due process, that the right things are being done for them, that, they're getting a just result. The district attorney's office, they represent the people, they represent the victims, and my job is to represent, the accused, and they have their story, they have their background, and it really takes someone who is able to listen to these individuals, to take the time to really listen to their stories, to know where they're coming from. Many of these individuals suffer from mental health conditions, or there's other things going on with them. So it's really a position that entails, you listening to them. A lot of times it's difficult because you have to listen to them, and it becomes, to a certain extent, you take a lot of that in with you, and you have to learn how to separate their life from your life, because at times, you want to cry with them, or you share similar experiences, and it's really putting that balance of saying, okay, I need to do this for them, but I have to also remember that I have to take care of myself and, proceed in that way, because it's very difficult at times to just separate from their stories. And if you're an individual that is able to, listen and take care of yourself, I would say that this is the position for you.
Very good. So let me pause my questions for a moment and open up to those who are attending. I've got plenty of other questions. I could ask questions all night, as anybody who's sat in any of my classes knows. But let me hold off for a moment and just throw it up into others. What questions do you have to this panel? And you do know that for those of you that I'm happy to call on you as I do on classes all the time. So, for example, Mike Kwan, if you're not ready, I might just call on you and ask for. Well, there you are. What did you want to ask?
Dean Winick, I feel like you're telepathic because you knew I had a question.
I could tell.
I have a specific question for Mr. Dow. Thank you so much for your time. You mentioned you became a certified law student. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and if a law student such as myself can look into that and what that entails?
Yes, great, Mr. Kwan. It's a great program. The State Bar has put it together, and I think it's changed a little bit over the years. But the last time that we had a student come do that in our office, they had to have evidence. They had to have constitutional law and civil procedure. I think those were the three that had to be done in order to apply to become a certified law student. And so in most cases, that was somebody after their second year by the time they had gotten evidence done. And so the State Bar has on their website, if you look for certified law student program, they'll have all those details. You need to register for that and apply with the State Bar. But it's incredible because it allows you to be in any practice under the supervision of a lawyer, whether it's private practice or the public defender or the DA's office. Under the supervision of a lawyer, you can go into court, you can appear, you can put on a trial. And we have tried to have all of our law student interns in our office become certified if they've met the minimum qualifications. And we always, if they are, then we allow them to do motions to suppress, preliminary hearings, misdemeanor jury trials if we're able to get one to go out. Sometimes that's the challenge, at least in the COVID era, to get misdemeanor trials to trial. But it's a wonderful program, and I would strongly encourage you and any other of your fellow students to inquire of that and become certified. It also will make you more marketable to any firm where you want to become an intern or a law clerk.
Yeah, and I don't know that they're still doing it, but in the Monterey District Attorney's Office, they had a certified law student prosecuted or was the prosecutor for a traffic court, and that was their job. They came in every day with a stack of issues, and that worked. For many, many years, it was just handed from one Monterey College of Law student to the next. It didn't even go through the law school. They all it was kind of an inside deal where each one picked somebody in their class they thought would be able to do a good job of that. Heather, you had a question.
I do, yes, thank you. I heard in listening to Ms. Fernandez that she clearly loves her job. She also mentioned a couple of the challenges, that being the caseload and also needing to separate a little from the stories and take care of herself. I wondered if either of the other two of you had something to share about what you find particularly challenging about your current positions.
Teri, we'll let you start first.
My current position is really easy because when I agreed to be senior counsel for a law firm, I told them I had 3 rules. One, that I would get paid X amount of dollars per hour. Number 2, that I could work on whatever cases I wanted to or say no to whatever case I wanted to. And 3, that I could do it at home in my PJs. I feel like I have it pretty easy right now. But in my prior jobs, some of the harder things I can remember in Superior Court as a court commissioner. They sent me all over the county. I went to all different courtrooms. It was have gavel will travel, and I heard a lot of different kinds of cases. And actually, the ones that were the toughest for me were when I was assigned to juvenile court, and I was assigned to the cases involving child abuse and children that were taken away from their parents for different reasons and placed in the juvenile court system. And to me, those were very, very hard cases. Those were hard for me because they were hard emotionally, because, seeing children suffer is just a terrible, terrible thing. And so those are some of the ones that were very difficult for me personally. But then of course, you are a judge and you have to separate yourself from that emotional side of it as best you can. And but that was the hardest kind of cases for me. And then of course the criminal cases, it's just like let's see, Ms. Fernandez said, you have to you can empathize with people, but you also have to separate yourself from it emotionally too, because you can see some pretty tragic things in the criminal cases. But for me, it was those juvenile cases, those juvenile dependency cases where the children were taken away from their parents because of their parents' inability to take care of them, or their parents were doing terrible things to them themselves.
So Dan, both early on in your career, what would you have considered some of the most challenging? And then obviously it might be different now.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what has always been challenging since I've been a prosecutor has been working with victims of crime or people that are the reporting parties of crime. And after evaluating all of the evidence that we have, not being able to file a case in court because of our ethical obligation to only go forward if we have proof in evidence, admissible evidence that is beyond a reasonable doubt. And then having to sit down with a victim and or their family and explain to them that we believe you, but our ethical and legal responsibility is to only pursue charges when we have enough evidence to do so, and we don't in this case. And so trying to explain it in a way that is compassionate and empathetic to what they've experienced, providing them services and other support mechanisms, all the while upholding our ethical obligation and our duty. And so I think that is probably one of the most difficult things to do. And we're in a college town here, much like Monterey. You've got Cal State Monterey Bay there, and there are sadly oftentimes reported sexual assaults that get referred to law enforcement and are investigated, and they involve alcohol and parties and a lot of situations and facts that make it incredibly hard to prove that the activity was without consent. And so I could get into the jury instructions for sexual assault cases, but for real quick, if alcohol is a component, it makes it incredibly hard, because even though the person is impaired, say the victim and the accused are both drinking, a complete defense for the accused, according to the jury instructions, are if they were reasonable in their belief that the victim consented, then the jury must return a verdict of not guilty. And so, and that's just one example. And so the bar is very high. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, as Ms. Fernandez would say in her closing argument, is the highest burden of proof in all legal proceedings. The government has not met their burden to convict Mr. Smith of non-consensual sexual contact with the victim. And they're very difficult to prove. And so it's important that we convey not only to the victims, but to the community, that our justice system is not going to hang somebody out to dry and pursue a charge if we don't have enough evidence that meets our ethical obligation. And I think the public, the other side to that is it's difficult for victims to hear, but it's also difficult for the community who, maybe there's now as DA. So that was my challenge as a line prosecutor, particularly when I had the sexual assault assignment, but now as the district attorney responsible for all the work that our office does, ultimately have to make decisions on cases maybe that are more visible in the public, a lot more public outcry. And at the end of the day, we have to make a decision that I believe is the right one, without just saying, where's the loudest noise coming from, right? We don't want a system where, like in the Roman era, you could go out and say, do we kill them or not? And if you got a big rousing loud noise from the crowd, you would give them what they want. We don't want a justice system like that. And so for me, that's the other challenging thing as the elected DA is remembering that we need to put aside, all of the public discussion. We need to perhaps take it into consideration generally, but not specifically on the case, because each case has to be provable on its own merits. And so I think that's one of the things that could be a danger for somebody in this role, is if you're quick to want to please everybody, you're not going to please everybody. There's always people that are happy and people that are upset about what it is that you're doing. And so kind of putting blinders on and filtering out the noise from either side of an issue and making a decision that's based in the evidence that you have and the law and the elements that we need to prove.
Thank you. Dave Westcott, you have a question.
Yes, sir. And that was more of a comment for Mr. Dow. I think it's appropriate just for the reason why you guys were holding this Zoom session. I hadn't really thought of the JAG route, to be honest with you. I am a U.S. Marine. As much as my young face it looks, by the time I'm finished here, I'll be over 40, which probably be looking at an age waiver for that opportunity. But you definitely piqued my interest, at least as far as the JAG reserve component, which I know is a possibility. So I appreciate that putting that in my brain.
Great.
You bet. And I would encourage you to send me an email. I also, as the military judge for California, do interviews of potential candidates for the California National Guard on the Army side. So I'd be happy to talk with you more offline with some more details. And two of my prosecutors are former Marines. So they've got both JAG and infantry officer experience. But Mr. Westcott, reach out. I'll put my email address in the chat. And if anyone wants to email me, be more than happy to talk with you offline.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dan. Lupita, let me ask you, you talked about the caseload and Dan did as well. Teresa talked about Teri talked about, the travel responsibilities, but how do you maintain a balance? So now you are in the trenches. You don't get to choose. You walk in and that stack of files is waiting for you no matter what. How do you strike some type of a balance between the pressure and stress of your day-to-day job and the rest of your life?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you keep your weekends. Initially, I was working through my weekends, just given the amount of cases. But as time goes by, you get better at what you do. You get faster. It just gets a little bit, I wouldn't say easier because each day is a challenge, but you just get better or more accustomed to it. And right now, what I try to do is basically say, okay, I'm taking 2 days. I'm taking the weekends for myself and doing something completely, non-related to my work, because if not, it could really lead to burnout, which is not good because you end up thinking about your cases on a daily basis. And, take some days off once in a while and do something for yourself, because it could get intense at times. Criminal law is pretty intense, and it's quite a challenge, honestly.
So if I had to highlight a consistent theme I heard from all three of you, it was that one of the aspects of getting into the public practice of law, whether it's the district attorney, public defender, county counsel's office, federal magistrate, is that there's not much time between law school and your practice. I mean, you hit the ground running. You are expected to come in, and there's no sitting around watching people for a year or two to figure out how to do it. You're handed a stack of responsibilities day one. Is that a fair assessment, Teri?
Yes. And the best way to learn how to do it is just to do it. It's painful at first, or it can be painful at first, but just keep breathing and you will get through it. And then the next day and the next day. And then before you know it, you will be so good at it, you won't even believe how far you've come.
So Lupita, when you're the closest, having finished law school, so your faculty members, professors told you that these were going to be important things when you were in class. You needed to actually pay attention to constitutional law and criminal procedure. It turns out they were right, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Dan, as you advise young lawyers, and again, you have an entire team, and I'm sure you worry about their balance, and so you don't lose them. They may be talented, but they can get down the rabbit hole and you lose their value. What do you advise them as far as a balance in their career?
Yeah, well, Ms. Fernandez hit it on the head. I mean, it's critically important that you, as to the extent that you can, that you separate your home life, your personal life from your work life. The topics of criminal cases, depending on what your assignment is, can be very, very hard to accumulate on you. And there's a thing called secondary trauma that we're becoming more aware of as a culture today. And that is, if you're exposed to trauma that other people have experienced and you're taking that on, either as a defense lawyer or as a prosecutor or someone within our offices that are dealing with it on a regular basis, it does have an effect on you that you don't notice right away. And so one of the things we do is we try to move our assignments around so that, the child abuse caseload and the sexual assault caseload is probably the worst for that in the DA's office. So I don't want anybody to be in that more than 2 to 3 years on the outset. and making sure that they get a chance to do something very different. But the other thing is I'm constantly asking the managers, I said, if your staff have not taken their vacation, get on them, make sure that you're encouraging them to take their vacation. I mean, you can't force them, but we certainly do everything we can to make that possible for them. And then to the other extent that we can, to have, office events, maybe a holiday event, a summer barbecue, and things where we can get our families together and kind of let things down. But she's spot on when it comes to taking care of yourself, because the work will be there for you Monday morning, and you'll probably be better for having cleared your mind and not filled your mind all weekend long to where now you haven't had any outlet for the stress. And you'll be better in court if you're well rested.
Well, let me thank all three of you. This has been a great panel. I could tell you what I took away, and I hope others did as well. I think there's a temptation to think that if you go to be a, quote, government lawyer, you're just stuck in a bureaucracy, and there's all of these rules and processes. And what you've explained is 180 degrees the opposite. Lawyers who hit the ground running, they're in court, they're practicing law, they've got primary responsibility, they answer to clients, they answer to the community. It's really a vibrant, exciting, and demanding career, whether it's your starting place in your career or an entire career. So what I hope you've lit that fire on some of our participants here, and that they will think of this as a career alternative. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lupita. Thank you, Teri. Dina, anything else for the evening?
No, that is it. It was a wonderful session, and I appreciate everybody, the panelists participating, as well as the guests attending. So with that, I bid everyone good night.